Welcome to the Stories Behind the Science, an intimate conversation series with the authors of the Academic Medicine Supplement on Disability Inclusion in Undergraduate Medical Education. In each episode, we step beyond the printed page. You'll hear directly from the authors, their motivations, the lived experiences and data that shaped their scholarship, and the futures they imagine for a more inclusive profession. These aren't just studies or commentaries. These are stories of systemic change and of a deep commitment to justice in medicine. Together, we'll explore the supplement's themes, the evolving landscape of disability inclusion, the learning environment, disability at the intersections, barriers to entry and transition, new frontiers in disability research, and real-world case studies of inclusion in action. Through these conversations, you'll meet the people behind the work, their stories, their vision, and the communities that drive their scholarship. So, join us as we uncover the stories behind the science, stories that are reshaping medical education and ultimately the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Lisa Meeks, and today's episode is especially close to my heart. I will always have a soft spot for UCSF. It's the place that launched my career and showed me what a true commitment to inclusion looks like on the ground. So it is more than a joy to welcome Dr. Erick Hung, Professor of Clinical Psychiatry and the Associate Dean for Students at UCSF, to this podcast series. In our conversation, we're going to discuss the expanded framework for understanding the learning environment for medical students with disabilities. You'll hear about the interaction with a student that first sparked the idea, the student advocates who grew that idea into action, and the task force that is turning lessons learned from this lived experience into a roadmap for change. Together, we'll explore how equity requires systems thinking, how theory translates into practice, and why stories from learners themselves remain the most powerful catalyst for change.
Hi, my name is Dr. Erick Hung. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a professor of clinical psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco. I am a psychiatrist by training, and I'm also the Associate Dean for Students at the medical school. A couple of fun facts about me. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am a UCSF lifer, which means that I went to medical school and then psychiatry residency. I did a fellowship in forensic psychiatry, and then I joined the faculty, I guess, many, many years ago, and am now somehow sitting in an office which is about 60 feet away from the student lounge that I started in this journey. So I've kind of come full circle. I'm also the proud father of two Basenjis. Basenjis are the smallest hound breed, and they are also known as the barkless dog. So they don't make any barks, but they do make a really interesting yodel sound.
That is a fun fact. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you were a lifer. That's so funny.
Yeah, somehow UCSF was just a really hard place to leave.
Yeah, there's something very special about UCSF, for sure.
Well, you might be a little bit biased about that.
I'm a lot biased about it, yes. Very, very.
We miss you so much, Lisa.
I miss you so much. I cannot wait for our listeners to hear more about this paper. What inspired you to pursue this line of inquiry? What got you excited about this paper?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that question. And there's so many different ways to answer it. I will say on the personal side, I have many members in my family who have disabilities. And that has always been, in many ways, kind of a North Star for me, especially as a student dean. I am so privileged to be in this role, this kind of education leadership role, where we have the most talented, amazing medical students ever. I'm sure every student dean says something like that. And I think in part because of the experiences in my family and also seeing the needs that our students with disabilities have at our medical school. And also, I know that students with disabilities have across medical schools in this country. It has just been really important for me to continue to make this place a more inclusive, equitable space where people truly feel like they not only can belong, but they can succeed and thrive. And I will say that the main story behind this paper is really a testament to our medical students here at UCSF. We have an amazing peer support group called the Disability Advocacy and Support Alliance. It's also goes by the name of DASA, DASA. And shortly after I started as an associate dean, our two DASA student leaders, who actually happened to be co-authors on this paper, but they reached out to me and shared some of the experiences that some of our students were having in the learning environment, and really wanting the school, our student experience team in particular, to think creatively with them and to co-create different opportunities and ideas to make our classroom and clinical spaces more inclusive and really rethink and challenge some of the ways that we have been doing things. And so we set up a task force. That task force was made up of students and staff and faculty. And we did about 5 months worth of work in a deep dive, really thinking about all the different drivers that get in the way of belonging and success for medical students with disabilities. And that led to an amazing task force report. And we're still chipping away at the recommendations. But one of the things that I came to appreciate was all of the different drivers that contribute to one's experience in the learning environment. There are the personal things that people bring and the social interactions that people have and the organizational components of how we influence the learning environment. And those are just a handful of the different drivers. But it really made me come to appreciate that we have to think very comprehensively and holistically about a whole range of different interventions if we're going to improve the learning environment for medical students with disabilities. And so that was the start of the journey towards this paper. And after the task force shared their report and we continued to chip away at the recommendations, I just feel very grateful that I have an amazing community of other student deans in the University of California system. And we decided to do a workshop at one of our national meetings, the Group on Student Affairs, and to do a workshop on how we can improve the learning environment for medical students with disabilities. And in some ways, that's how you came onto that team as a panelist, Lisa, and that sort of led to some more conversations. And of course, with Dr. Meeks, you can't have a conversation without quickly turning it into a paper. And so I think that was the road towards this manuscript in some ways. And I just feel so grateful for that.
Well, yeah, I have been accused of that. But you know what? I love playing the cheerleader role. And I just want to say I was a fill-in on that panel. I was not originally supposed to be on that panel. It was the great Grace Clifford from UCLA, from David Geffen. And by the way, just, oh my gosh, do I love the UC Student Affairs deans. I mean, love, love, love these people. It's such a great group. And I was in awe just sitting there listening to all of the things you were doing individually. But I remember watching you give your portion of the talk and thinking, that's brilliant. And I just happened to work with Larry.
Yes.
And I thought, no, this can't stop here. This has to move forward. Oh my gosh. I love that. I also love, if I can just take a moment to appreciate how many students are on this paper. And I love the kind of infusion of student co-developed and in many cases, student-led work that is in the supplement and especially on your paper. And I just met the lead author at an AMA conference. Did she tell you? Have you talked to her?
I haven't talked with Alexandra, and I will say that Alexandra, as our first and lead author, amazing, out of this world.
I turned the corner and I saw the name first. And I thought, I know that name. I don't know this person, but I know that name. And she saw my name tag. And then, within 3 minutes, it was, selfies and this deep conversation about experiences. And I know she really appreciated your mentorship on this paper as well.
Well, I will say, you had mentioned Larry Gruppen, and, Larry for me had always been this, this giant. He is still a giant in the medical education field.
A gentle giant.
A gentle giant. And I was always so impressed really with the way that he so succinctly and comprehensively described the learning environment in some of his original work. And so when you made that connection in real time to Larry, and I'd never worked with Larry directly. I mean, the two of us just had a blast working together as senior authors on this paper, and then bringing in Larry's mentees and then some of the students doing this work here at UCSF. It was just such a pleasure to have 4 medical students on the team and then to work with Larry.
That makes me so happy. I love connecting people, good people doing good work. And Larry is certainly a good person. He is the most humble person, as big of a name as he is, as important as he is. He has always just been very kind to me and made time. And I remember that email saying, I know you've just retired, but I need you to come out of retirement.
Yes.
I need you to do this. We can't do this without you. Well, behind every study or research journey, there are surprises and challenges along the way. Did you encounter any kind of surprises, or what challenged you when pulling this paper together?
Oh gosh, it's such a great question. And a couple of things come to mind. I will say that as part of our process in expanding the way that we think about the learning environment, one of the sort of key aspects of the paper is that we really consider the societal drivers to how learners experience the learning environment and succeed and thrive. And perhaps it wasn't a surprise that we added the societal component. And I also think that that has been growing for quite some time, especially in this moment right now, this moment that we are all in collectively as a country and even globally, thinking about the ways that political discourse and societal events deeply impact the ways that our learners are able to engage or not engage in the learning environment. That, I think, was perhaps not so much a surprise, but really an affirmation that we're on the right path here in thinking more holistically about all of the different drivers in the learning environment that lead towards success. And so that was one thing that comes to mind. I think the other thing that comes to mind for me in that question is that I'm so much of a doer, and this concept of a conceptual framework is not always my forte. I mean, I love frameworks. I definitely have lots of frameworks on a whiteboard at times when I'm sort of brainstorming stuff. And I also recognize that frameworks only go so far in that they show you a roadmap for how to think about solutions in a very pragmatic way. And one of the surprises about this paper as we were embarking on it was really trying to bring an expanded conceptual framework of the learning environment to life and make it really pragmatic. And I feel really proud of what we accomplished at the end in the paper that we didn't necessarily have in the beginning, which are very concrete examples of what institutions can do across all of the different learning environment domains to make institutions a better place. And then to really bring it further to life with some vignettes. And we have 2 vignettes in this paper that really walk through a student who is hard of hearing and another student who has bipolar disorder, and really think about how can we think specifically about these students and how the learning environment roadmap can be helpful in different kinds of initiatives and interventions that will be helpful not only for the institution, but for a specific student.
I fell in love with the addition of the societal piece. When I was reading that, I was like, yes, we absolutely need that. And you're right, especially if you look at what's happening right now, just thinking about how that's impacting in macro or micro ways, the way that the learner is engaging in the environment. Very, very important. Well, if you think about the human story, the whole stories behind the science, the focus of this series on the papers in the supplement, what stands out to you the most for your paper? I know you've already mentioned you had some students who were really advocating for a better learning environment experience that then got to do this paper. That was probably full circle for them. What's the human part behind this work?
Yeah, so I guess there's so many different stories. And in fact, I think some of the stories predate the paper. They really came out of some of that initial work from the task force, and then that sort of starting to spark different ideas about how we could think very strategically and holistically about the learning environment. One of the more poignant stories that I heard that really got me sort of fired up and motivated to want to charge a task force to take a look at disability inclusion at our institution was a story from one of our medical students who was in the preclinical phase of their curriculum, so before they hit clerkships. And they had an accommodation 2 times the time and testing in the environment. And they had some classmates who saw them go into, in this case, it was an anatomy practical. And in an anatomy practical, you have all the different stations set up and students rotate through different stations and are asked to identify anatomical structures. And because of the extended time as part of the accommodation, one of our students shared a story with me where one of their classmates saw them go into the anatomy lab before others did and asked them after they got out, well, why do you get to go in early? And the student shared, listen, I get this question all the time with extended time testing and accommodations. And it's like a paper cut. And it's not just one paper cut. I get this all the time. And things like, for example, the activation of stereotype threat. Like, why do I have to defend my accommodation time and answer questions from my classmates? That raises a lot of just nuisance and frustration for me. And it reminds me of all of the ongoing stigma that we have, and also trying to wrestle with the tension between fairness versus equity. And just a small comment like that just raises all of that up for me. And how do we think about having different kinds of conversations in the way that we help students orient to what our values are? And how do we help engage in those kinds of peer-to-peer conversations? And how can institutions and medical schools reinforce that? And so just that small comment as part of the human story, I think really started to lead down this road of, oh gosh, there's like a whole range of different interventions and initiatives that we should think about, and whether they're social in nature or organizational in nature, or recognizing the societal drivers for this. That is the reality that we have. And so in many ways, that one piece of feedback that I received from that student sparked a task force. That wasn't the only reason. There were many other things that force, but that, sparked a task force.
It's a domino effect. And stories propel us to move, to take action, especially stories that make us uncomfortable. And I can see, the audience won't be able to see you, but I can see just in recounting that story that the student having to share that with you, that made you uncomfortable for the student and uncomfortable about the environment. Like, what's happening that people would be questioned about a need? And I love how you said it really is this idea. Everyone has this idea of fairness. I mean, we teach our own children this, right? Be fair to your brother and sister and everything's equal. But that isn't equity in real life. And so being able to discuss, discern, demonstrate the difference between the two concepts is really important.
I agree.
So how do you hope that the readers and now podcast listeners will use and apply your work in their practice?
Gosh, well, one, I just hope people will read the paper and listen to this podcast. And I will say that I really hope that both kind of listeners and readers of the paper will see this conceptual framework as just a roadmap. I think that sometimes we think that educational theory and conceptual frameworks are very academic and very distant from what we do, especially for all of us kind of on the ground, teaching and working and trying to make our institutions a better place. And to me, conceptual frameworks, all they are roadmaps. They're a guide for us to be able to think in a very intentional and thoughtful way about how we can solve problems. This paper hopefully offers a roadmap in a light of how do we think about all the different levers that we might consider pulling to be able to create more inclusive and equitable spaces for students with disabilities. And so, for example, I would hope that people consider the importance of social interactions and how do we help think about different social interactions and social groups to support students with disabilities. We shared an example in the paper, the power of peer support groups like DASA, that group that I was sharing with you earlier. And that's one potential lever to pull. Or alternatively, you could think about pulling the organizational lever and really thinking about the kinds of policies that we have, for example, attendance policies or technical standards, and how do we really critique and evaluate those policies to be more inclusive and equitable over time. You can also think about the role that society plays, which is that new component in the learning environment in this paper, and really thinking about how we advocate for justice. And that becomes an incredibly important lever to play as an initiative, an intervention, but it also is an important lever to understand because that societal driver goes beyond organizations and yet is so powerful in the places that we work and train. And so I think that hopefully people will take away all of these different kinds of levers that one could pull. I haven't even listed all of them. There's our physical spaces and our virtual spaces and the personal contributions that we bring, all of which make a very rich tapestry of the learning environment.
Amazing. Well, I wonder if there was a moment in your research or writing process that shifted your own perspective on disability in medical education.
Such a good question. I think for me, I've been very humbled about how much work we still need to do. And that really came.
You and me both, Eric. You and me both.
I've just been very humbled by that. I think in the process of doing this paper, I was also in the process of rewriting our technical standards. And there's just so much work to be done. And I think that this paper, it gave me some permission to say, okay, you don't have to do it all alone. You need an incredible team of students and staff and faculty who feel really passionate and charged to do this work. And there's also a lot to be done. And so I think that some of the initiatives and interventions we give as examples in the paper, I sort of think about even my own institution and say, gosh, we're still a long way from accomplishing all of that. And that is very humbling. And so I think that that was one thing that I really took away. I will also say that being able to work with an incredible team collectively, team members who had disabilities, team members who did not identify as having a disability, being able to learn from each other was an incredible gift in the process, and to really be able to go deep in terms of how we were thinking about the kinds of experiences and different examples that we wanted to share.
That's great. I love that. Your paper contributes to a larger supplement. The supplement breaks the papers into themes, right?
Yeah.
How do you see your work fitting into advancing the broader conversation as part of your theme or overall?
It's a great question. I don't want to go back to that roadmap sort of analogy, but I kind of do. And I was just, I felt so grateful and a little bit like an imposter to be on the AAMC webinar last week.
Oh, you did such a good job.
I know, but to be sort of next to, in the shadows of, who knows what the right sort of virtual metaphor is, but to be able to be with such amazing authors that were showcased, I will say that I was feeling out of my league. And I will also say that with each of the different areas of expertise and focus that the contributors to the supplement have shared, whether that's with disability resource professionals, or in rethinking technical standards, or in thinking about the intersectionality of individuals with disabilities and also race and ethnicity and so many other minoritized identities, that this paper will hopefully give people some roadmap for how to situate in place the kinds of initiatives, all of the advocacy, thinking about different areas for us to better understand with more clarity as this research and this work continues. And so I do think that learning environments are powerful because they can really help us understand all of the different spaces and contributors that contribute towards a student's learning trajectory and learning experience. So I go back to the roadmap, Lisa. This paper hopefully will be a roadmap for people.
Yeah. And I mean, your paper is part of the landscape, right? So it is intended certainly to be a roadmap. And I agree. I think that there's so many papers in the supplement that show you what's wrong. And I'm so grateful to have a paper that shows you how to organize it and think about it and implement some sort of corrective action in the learning environment to help improve and remove some of those barriers and improve the experience for learners with disabilities. So I'm really grateful that the paper is in there for sure. So you've mentioned a few people so far, but one of the things that I was thinking about as I was developing these questions, it's always for me, I wish I could thank that reviewer or that author of that paper that I read that then sparked something in me to write about something else, or a student that DM'd our account and shared something. Like those are the people that keep you going. And I thought, I want to give people a chance to really talk about who shaped and helped develop this work, who the collaborators were, who the mentors were, who the students were. Is there anybody that you think about and you think, oh gosh, I want to thank that person?
Oh gosh.
I just love a good love fest. Like a good shout out. Thank you. You know, people, there's so much unsung work that gets done.
I mean, hopefully without sounding too boring, I want to give a shout out to all of the co-authors on this paper. They all worked their butts off for it. And especially, as first authors often do, Alexandra, who you shared earlier, really just worked so hard in thinking about where we were, how do we understand the reviewers' perspectives and input, and how do we make it a better paper and to get it into a place that really is going to be concise and be inclusive and just be meaningful for readers. And so Alexandra just did a phenomenal job. I will also say, and perhaps this isn't going to put you on the spot, Lisa, but you as a guest editor, what's your official title for the supplement? Guest editor?
I want to think of a funny title to represent what I actually did.
Flavor of Love editor.
Who put me in charge? It was guest editor.
Guest editor. I mean, there's a special place in heaven for guest editors, right?
I literally have a newfound respect that I always respected, but there is an elevated respect I have for editors.
Well, I say that because you were such a huge part of our process and really thinking about how we could make it a better paper. And where we started and where we ended, we could not have done that without your really thoughtful ideas and suggestions. I feel like you were just as much a part of our team as all those people on the actual paper itself, Lisa. And, me personally, I just want to express my gratitude for all of the time that you spent to really bring this paper to a place that I feel really proud of.
Well, thank you very much. I love cheerleading and moving people. It excites me to see people excited about and writing about their experiences. And it was an absolute pleasure. And I'm equally proud of the paper and all of the papers. I'm really happy with it. And thank you so much. But you all had to do the hard work. So.
Well, we could not have done it without you.
If you could leave trainees, faculties, or leaders with one take-home idea or take-home story from the paper, what would it be?
I think that for me, and I shared this in the webinar last week, and I really mean it, I think we have to challenge ourselves and encourage ourselves to be systems thinkers in everything that we do. It's so easy for us to see a problem and to kind of jump to the first idea that comes up, that we come up with as a solution. And sometimes our instincts are spot on and we just jump right in. And I think that the more that we can think about slowing ourselves down and to think about, okay, is there a particular roadmap or framework or, dare I say, even like educational theory that we should be considering right now as we try to understand this problem in front of us? The more that we think, I think, in frameworks, and the more that we think about particularly belonging and success in a systems-oriented way, that will really help us in our work. And so I really hope that people walk away from this paper recognizing the fact that we can do a lot if we think holistically and we think about the socio-ecological, socio-material theories around us that can really force us and encourage us to think in a systems-oriented way to solve problems.
I 100% agree. I love that advice. I think that slowing down the way we approach issues or challenges is really, really important. And thinking about things differently is really important. And so I love that you've given people a framework in which they can think about the learning environment differently, but also that framework was disability informed by people who have experienced the learning environment and who help administer it and teach in it. And that's really special. Okay. Well, I think we're on our last question. I kind of don't want the interview done. I kind of just want to sit and chat. I ask you this question and I warn you that if you don't think of something, I will think of something for you. So
oh gosh,
I think you should be really motivated to think of something.
Now I feel terrified.
You should. Looking forward, what stories or questions are you the most eager to explore? What's next for you, Erick, in doing this work?
So I think that in many ways, as we were, and again, this was a long process to write this paper, and I feel really good about where we landed, and it is just the tip of the iceberg, right? So I think about one of our tables, there's a lot of words on it, but it breaks down the 6 different components of the learning environment and shares some examples of how we can create more inclusive spaces and equitable spaces for students with disabilities. And we just listed 3 or 4 examples. There are so many more things that every medical school in this country needs to know and needs to do in order to advance this work. And even within just one of those examples, there are so many things that one needs to flush out, and the nuances and the barriers and the ways that, yeah, that looks good on paper, but how are you actually doing that? So I'll take, for example, the story that I was sharing before about the comment that other students were making when students were leaving the anatomy practical with extended time for their accommodations. And schools can say, yeah, we need to fix that problem, but how are you going to fix that problem? And how are you going to raise people's awareness? Do you do that at orientation? How do you do that during orientation? And those are the kinds of things that we need to continue to do and to learn from each other as best practices. So you can have an example initiative, but how are you going to actually bring that to life and do so in a way that is, like you said, disability informed and really co-created with everyone in the learning environment together, students and staff and faculty. So I do think that this is really honestly just the tip of the iceberg, and we see more of the iceberg in some areas than others. And I will say that you start doing work and shining more light, and then you realize that there's a lot of other corners out there that need light to be shined on. And so that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited to take some of the examples and to really be able to continue to explore ways that we can flush them out, share best practices, and help people not feel like they're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel or doing it for the first time. That's what we can all benefit from as a community, to be able to not feel like we're having to always be the first one to pave the way.
And so what I'm translating this to is that we will have more scholarship coming from UCSF on best practices.
as long as you can guess edit. Oh,
anything for UCSF. Well, will I see you at LSL? Will you be presenting the poster?
I will be at the poster.
Yay! So anyone in the audience that's going on Saturday, come by and see Erick and hear about the paper. And that's amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
For everything you're doing. UCSF has been leading the way and continues to do so. And I love just watching and seeing what's next, because it really helps move nationally the expectation for what it means to be inclusive.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It was a pleasure to be able to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you, Erick. That was thoughtful, generous, and it was fun. Conversations like this remind me of what it looks like when an institution is willing to listen to its students, rethink entrenched systems, and model what it means to lead with inclusion. For our listeners, here's the key takeaway. The expanded framework that Erick and his colleagues created reminds us that the learning environment is never just policy or curriculum. It also has societal forces that shape whether students with disabilities feel that they belong and can thrive. It all started with one student's story, proof that even a single interaction can ripple outward and make institutional change. All right, what's one small action you can do this week? If you're in leadership, ask your students what barriers they're facing and be ready to act on what they tell you. If you're faculty, revisit your policies and practices for your courses with equity at the forefront. If you're a student, know that your story has the power to spark change, just as it did at UCSF. Want more? Subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss future stories behind the science. Share this episode with a colleague who still thinks inclusion might just be about accommodations. And remember that culture shifts when stories lead the way. Final thought, UCSF is a very special place, certainly near and dear to my heart. But the lessons here extend to every institution. Listen to your learners, embrace systems thinking, and act with humanity. That's how we'll move from access to true belonging.